Serious, when was a time you interacted with a seemingly normal person, but later found out that they were not? I worked at Circuit City as a teenager and was helping someone looking at TVs. My boss called me over and said he needed me up front to help at checkout. Thought it was weird because there wasn't a line, but whatever. Turns out the guy I was helping was Drew Peterson, who has since been convicted of murder. This was back when he was just a suspect, but my boss recognized him from the news and didn't want to compromise my safety. That was solid of your boss. I worked with a guy that was later found guilty of murder by intentionally leaving his toddler in a hot car. My ex-wife and I even had dinner with him and his wife. Everything seemed completely normal. Edit, spell check. I also missed the intentional bit in first read of this comment. As far as people who do this unintentionally, my heart goes out to them honestly. I remember hearing about one story about a woman who did this. She had a change in routine or something and had her daughter with her in a circumstance where it wasn't her normal routine, i.e. had brought her daughter with her to work or something. Daffer was asleep in the back seat. She was in autopilot mode and just completely forgot she had her daughter with her. She could have been a great, supportive parent for all I know. But a lapse of absent-mindedness during a regular routine and now she's responsible for her child's death. There's something about trivial mistakes with dire consequences that is particularly tragic. I was flying freight to an island in the Caribbean. One day I landed and began to rush to unload the plane due to a storm being quite visible on the horizon. A man was standing next to the runway, casually watching and nothing else until I tripped and almost fell. He laughed. My response was to throw the box I was carrying at him and yell that if he was going to just stand there like a useless lump, that I was going to put his to work. He looked surprised then actually did begin to help unload the plane and I left without even knowing his name. I was enlightened several days later when I came again. That man was the millionaire who owned a neighboring island that the normal men worked on. I had thrown a box at David Copperfield. I think you humbled him for a moment. Worked with a woman for 2 years at a child-related business, perfectly normal mother type with multiple children. While we worked together, she was on vacation, took her youngest child, 2 years/0, out on a hike and stabbed him in the chest with a chef's knife. She then called 911 and frantically reported they had been mugged. The police knew something was up because she also said nothing had been taken. Child miraculously survived, and it came out later that an affair she was having had been exposed that night before the stabbing. Turns out the child was a product of the affair. Talk about misplaced blame. Edit, I should have added she was convicted, spent 10 years in prison, no parole, and was released after the full 10. She has since passed away, within a year of her release. I don't know her cause of death. That's an evil lady. My 18-year-old daughter dated this guy for about 5 months. She told me he was a little weird at times. I just thought he was super shy. He called me mom. He would play video games with my son. They moved in together and he changed from being a hard worker to not going to work and expecting her to provide financially and do all the chores. She went out of town and came back to find he hadn't taken good care of her dog. She broke up with him. The next day he killed her. I was in total shock. I didn't believe he could do something so terrible. I even went and saw him when he turned himself in 2 days later, to hear it from him. He did it. He didn't seem to have guilt. Now he stares at me in court. He smirks. He laughs. He was given a plea agreement and will be sentenced on March 23. He will only get 16 to 25 years. It's not fair. Finding my daughter's murdered body and hearing him say he was the one who did that to her showed me even the most normal-seeming person may not be normal at all. To everyone wanting to write letters to the judge, I put the information on my profile. Thank you all so much for all your kind words. I'm very sorry to hear that. Words cannot express how disgusting that monster is. Back in like 2005-06, in my early days of music I was on tour in the US. I was about 18-19 and at that time I was in a band that didn't make any money, so naturally we slept on floors and such after shows. We played a Midwestern city that we did really well in, had a lot of friends in the area and whatnot. Next show was only 2 hours away, so we stay with a kid from the show that was a fan. I end up going off and spending most of the night with a girl I'd end up dating, but returned back pretty late. Next day, kid decides he wants to go to the show 2 hours away. He liked smoking pot and so did I, so me and one other of our guys just rode with him to the show so we could smoke weed. Anyways, fast forward like 3 or 4 days later and we get a call from someone in that city letting us know the kid had been arrested. charged with murdering his dad and keeping him in the deep freeze of his house. The house we stayed in. The body was in there while we were there. It was crazy because he seemed like a normal dude, nothing off about him. Apparently his father was very abusive and there's a lot of nuances in the story, but either way, he still killed his dad with an axe. Edit, RIP my inbox / that guy's dad. And GT, apparently his father was very abusive. Obviously without knowing any details, but somehow I don't blame him, it's just sad what his father turned him into. Back in the late 90s, I had a friend from work whose brother hung out with us a few times when we'd go out. He seemed normal. A few years later, he allegedly, his family maintains he's innocent, set off a couple of bombs at biotech companies as part of some extreme animal rights group he'd gotten mixed up in. He managed to evade the FBI and disappeared. It being shortly after 9/11, the FBI put him in their top 10 for a while and America's Most Wanted did a profile on him. As far as I know, he's never been caught. I've seen his picture a couple of times in movies when some cop is searching a database of suspects and it's always a weird blast from the past moment. I was in a reenactment group when I was younger, along with my family and others. Two of the dads were like the head honchos, running the show, and they did it wonderfully. We were a part of this group for years. Then come to find out that one of those head honchos had been sexually abusing his daughter since she was 7, she was 15 when it came out. He only did 3 years. I hate that the math works out that they only kept him locked up until she was 18. I chatted with a random guy in the laundry room of our apartment complex. He was nice, friendly, outgoing kind of fellow. Skinny thing. A few weeks later I ran into him and his girlfriend on the elevator. I said, "Hey Mike, how's it going?" He proceeded to tell me how it was not going well for him. He'd been evicted from our apartment complex because he had like 8 people living with him, had been stabbed while he was on the bus coming home from an AA meeting, was recovering from the stab wound when his girlfriend, the one who was with him in the elevator at that very moment, broke up with him, his side piece was pregnant and the bitch in the front office wanted him to turn in his key ASAP. I was just kind of like cool. Well, see you around. I went night fishing, started chatting with the guy in the swim next to me and cooked some barbecue, had a beer and a normal chat. As the night drew on he pulled out a pipe and started smoking some crack and banging on about how the earth was flat. It was quite a long night and I didn't even catch a fish.